As to this, what is the pleasure of the committee? Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out House Concurrent Resolution 5027 favorably for passage.
Do I have a second from Representative Epley? Discussion. Representative Hoyt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought some of the questions brought up during the hearing that got me thinking. And one point that was made was how do we make sure that Native American culture is reflected as part of this process. And there was also some, it seems like we don't really know for sure how the delegates would be appointed. That process could be a little bit fluid. So since our government rules and laws have historically been molded by a very specific demographic, I would like to make sure that women are included in the sequel, that Native voices are reflected. So I'd like to offer an amendment.
Thank you. Amendment. Just stand fast. Would you like to explain your amendment?
Yeah, the amendment would require that the Kansas delegation to the Convention of the States would include a current or former member of the Kansas House of Representatives or Kansas Senate who is a Native American woman.
Thank you. Is there a second to the amendment? Representative Clayton has seconded. Discussion on the amendment. Yes, sir. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the maker of the amendment, if I may.
I'm sorry.
A question for the maker of the amendment.
Yes, you may.
Okay. Why are we narrowing this down to a former or current representative or Kansas senator? It seems like we're narrowing it down to, I'm unaware, maybe 3 or 4 individuals.
Yeah, I thought on that, and the reason that I decided to make it as somebody who has participated in government before is I do believe that as we go through these processes, we become more familiar with how laws are made, and I just think that I hope that all of us sitting here feel like it is made serving either in the House or the Senate has made us capable of representing something of this of high importance.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a follow-up.
You may.
What happens if the current or former member of the Kansas House of Representatives or Kansas Senate who is Native American woman that is chosen, again, we're in a very narrow field of just a couple, refuses to go or refuses to be a delegate?
That is part of, I think, some of how we don't have answers of how the delegation is selected. So we got to hope that we continue electing more Native American women to office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Maybe I have a question for research, and maybe they can give that to me or not. How many Native American females have served in the Kansas House of Representatives? And I'm going to say 10 years, in the last 10 years. I think it's a reasonable, because you have a small pool. So I just wondered how many members that are presently active or served in the last 10 years. Research, can you get that, or is that something we can't do now? Probably not. Okay, all right. Yes,
Mr. Chair, would you allow me to make a friendly amendment to my own amendment?
I will let you make a substitute amendment to
Okay.
your amendment.
I would be willing to change it to just any Native American woman in Kansas who has held elected office.
Okay, I'm going to wait for the revisor here. Fine. Okay, so we're changing it, my understanding, from the Kansas House of Representatives or the Kansas Senate to any elected office in the state of Kansas.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and that would be your substitute motion.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to the substitute motion? Representative Clayton. Thank you. Discussion on the substitute motion on the amendment. On the amendment, substitute motion for the amendment. Which is the amendment? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the substitute motion to the amendment, it would take out the piece of being in Kansas House of Representatives or Senate. Is that correct?
That's correct. To any elected official that has held office. And that's not descriptive. It could be a mayor or city council or. And maybe I'll need a question for the reminder. Would that be a tribal council also? That's not an elected official from the state of Kansas. So
Add tribal council, sure, if you want. Public official,
public official, would that qualify? I don't know. And probably nobody does.
make sure that it's included tribal official, public official.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anyways, further discussion on the substitute motion on the amendment. Representative Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a comment regarding the substitute amendment and the amendment itself, if I may.
You may.
It's important that we keep to the original language of this bill because so far 17 states have adopted identical language, and it's very important to the integrity of this process. You know, this resolution is not about Republicans or Democrats or any particular one group or another. This is about our system of government and the balance of power between the federal government and the states. And so I would oppose the amendments being offered. However, I will work with my colleagues to ensure that when the time comes, if Congress shall call a convention of states, if we do get the 2/3 of the states to sign and apply for a convention of states, I would certainly work with my colleagues to make sure that we have a representative delegation that would attend such convention. So I can only give you my personal assurance that if I'm here when that happens, I would certainly work with everybody to make sure they have a voice. But ultimately, it would take 3/4 of the states to ratify any proposed amendments. So it's going to have broad support. It's going to have Republicans and Democrats. It's going to have independents. It's going to have libertarians. And we need to make sure our tribal governments have their voice too. And I would certainly want to see that happen. So all I can do is give you my assurance to see that through. And I would ask my colleagues to oppose both substitute and the underlying amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I would have one comment on this. I appreciate the representative's comments that every state has to pass an identical amendment. The other thing is, if this morning I just introduced a bill that I referred to as a trailer bill, which will have the more specifics into it. So I would think, and I would expect, Representative, if your amendment fails today, that you could bring this amendment again on the workings of how it would work, which is the trailer bill. Yes, Representative Miller.
I know there were others before me, but I wanted to ask a question on what you just said regarding an identical amendment. Would you explain what the point was?
The point was that my understanding, and it's only a layman's understanding of this, is that each state, the 13 states that have passed it, all have the same language in it.
But was your point that we had to have identical language to those states? And if so, what's the authority on that?
There is no authority. It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
But that is the recommendation that we had, and I think that we got that with when the.
Well, one of the proponents advocated that, but I've not, one of the proponents, the same one that said that, said read. And I've been reading, and I've not found anything in my readings that said the resolutions have to be identical. But thank you. I just wanted to raise that point.
I appreciate that. And Article 5 does not say that it has to be identical. I agree with that. But Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to say something very similar to what the previous representative said, is that yes, I understand that it's important to at least have some sort of universal language, but we really do need to keep in mind that we are the Kansas legislature. We are charged by our constituents to make sure that we are doing Kansas things, not things that anyone at the federal level expect us to do. I think one of the issues that I've had with this bill, and it's been brought to this committee a number of times, is that every time there's always some congressperson from another state, someone from back east that's coming here to tell us our business and tell us how to do things. State legislatures are our own governing bodies. We are not subject to what some congressperson says. And I really want us to continue. We might see conservative amendments to this. You never know what's going to come up after the one that we're currently working. But to say that we shouldn't amend something and we should do things the way that the feds want us to do, that's not very respectful to our own constituents. We need to do things the way that Kansas does them. And so if we are going to be different, well, that's something that our state is kind of good at anyway. And so I think we need to continue being independent as we go through this process and as we work this bill. Thank you. And obviously I support the amendment. Should not surprise anyone.
Well, but I would make a comment that the last senator was from Oklahoma that came in. So he wasn't from the East Coast. He was to our south.
Yes, but still not from our state and still, Washington politics. This isn't Washington. We're better than they are.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to clarify that he was not from the East Coast. That would have insulted him if you'd have called him from the East Coast, out of Oklahoma. I go next to Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a really unique amendment. I felt like my concerns were really heard. I did ask many people about what is tribal representation going to be brought to this new form. They say, read the Constitution. I said, we're in there as merciless savages. So how is this going to assure that we have a seat at the table? I think that was one of my main concerns with this bill, is how are the delegates going to be picked? I understand there's a trailer bill, but again, it doesn't give me much confidence in black and white that tribal representation will be considered and not continue to be ignored. I do support the amendment. I think it's really unique, and thank you for hearing my concerns.
Thank you. Representative Penn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
sorry,
One,
Mr. Chairman.
one of the things, I'm not going to support the amendment. One of the things that we bring up, and when we consider in Article 5,
You were out of turn. I called on Representative Penn. You're next.
okay,
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was coughing, so it probably sounded like him. Just to help me in my understanding, we have the amendment. Now we have a substitute for that amendment.
That is correct.
Is it in order to, is it allowable to offer a substitute amendment to that substitute?
No.
Roger that. Well, the question that I have is, where does this stop? Because if we start going down the lane of every demographic being included as an amendment for representation in the underlying bill, where does it stop? Everyone has a carve out. I think that we are all Kansans, and I would say that the substitute amendment should say a Kansas citizen. Never thought I'd say this, but I'm in agreement with the previous speaker saying that we're Kansas and we do Kansas things. If you were to put language in here, make it Kansas citizens, pull us together instead of doing the ad nauseum dilution and division. And let's just keep it simple.
Thank you. Representative Smith now.
I apologize to the committee. I'm hard of hearing. I wear hearing aids. I have a hard time hearing, so I apologize for stepping on your
It was
feet. there,
probably my fault. I didn't speak up.
So anyway, the idea that this is a state thing is only partial. We're operating under an Article 5 once we adopt this. So we have to look at what can be attacked on it. And so we look back in history on different Article 5 convention cases, and we see that there is some court activity on whether one call is identical to the next, and identical is a subjective term, right? What is identical? We're putting Kansas in this one, so it's not identical. But the basic premise of has to be something similar to, and we know that from previous court cases. And I'm not going to sit here and cite them or read through the book on what they say, but that's why we need to try and stay as close as possible to it, so that should the argument come up, we can show that we were in aggregation with other states. And that's the purpose of it.
Thank you. No other. Yes, Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as a point of concern, any amendment that's offered on this resolution, you feel, and I'll direct this to the representative to speak about changing the resolution with amendments. You will be speaking out against all these amendments that come up because there's a pretty good pile over here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further discussion. Representative, you may move your substitute amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask for support, as the process continues on. I think this is a way, once again, to include voices that have been historically left out of our process. And I close and move my amendment.
Thank you. You have heard the motion of Representative Hoyt for her substitute amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes does have it. Motion fails. I'm sorry? Division has been called for. All in favor of the substitute motion, raise the right hand. Eight.
Oh, wait. Nine. I didn't, sorry, I didn't get nine.
Uh,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Very well. All opposed to the amendment.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Thank you. The noes have it. Noes does have it. Back on the original amendment. Representative Hoyt, do you wish to close on your original amendment?
Yeah, why not? Let's keep trying. I close and move the amendment.
Thank you. Now we're back on her original amendment, which was the Kansas State Representative or Kansas Senate, who is a Native American, to appoint to that committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes do have it. Amendment fails. We're back on the resolution. Other comments on the resolution? Yes, Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not quite sure where to start with this one, but I'll start with one of the conferees who was waving around the document she identified as the Freedoms Frontier National Heritage Area Management Plan as an example of the tyranny of the federal government. Well, I was on the Lawrence City Commission when the Freedoms Frontier National Heritage Area was adopted. It's a plan to increase tourism. And I went back and reviewed the management plan and the authorizing document. There's nothing in it or in the authorizing statute that gives that body power to do anything to anybody. It's anything they do with the landowner is completely voluntary, says so in red letters on the cover of the plan. So if there's a member of this committee who thinks that the Freedoms Frontier National Heritage Area Management Plan is tyranny, just let me know. I would be happy to start a GoFundMe campaign to buy you a ticket to a place where you can see the real deal. I did a little calculating. It's not clear what the rules of this convention would be, although I think it's probably fair to assume that it's going to be one state, one vote, and operating by a majority vote. So, if that's the case, by my calculation, states with a combined population of 16% of the U.S. population could make decisions on a body like this. I find that a little concerning. Again, there's no until we pass the trailer bill, there's no method of selection for the members. But I think we can fairly assume that it's going to be reflective, the membership of the House here and the Senate. There's going to be similar percentages. It's likely to have a supermajority who are willing to make such fair and wise decisions as the redistricting plan that we passed last week. And so I can only assume that any decision made by a Kansas delegation at this convention is going to be something that the vast majority of my constituents are going to find distasteful. And so I guess that's an incentive for me to not support that. I understand that all the convention can do is propose amendments. But I guess my fear is the amendments that are likely to come out of a convention like this are going to be really divisive. And even if none of them pass anywhere, they're more likely to throw, fuel on the flames of the partisan splits that we're seeing right now, rather than to do anything to fix them. And that's my major concern here. And finally, as one of the conferees pointed out, that a member of this committee last year was pushing the notion that the House and the Senate of Kansas can pass this resolution by a majority vote rather than 2/3 as established in our Constitution by the amendment passed by the citizens of Kansas. And if the proponents of this, if that's the way they feel about the will of the people, then I think this thing could be a very dangerous thing indeed. And so I will be voting no with a number of typographical marks in front of it.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion on the resolution? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment.
You have an amendment. Could you hold just a second while it gets passed out?
Would you like me to explain it to save some time?
While they're doing that, would you explain it?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Every member of this committee swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Kansas and the United States. What I'm going to do with this amendment is that the will of the people of the state of Kansas changed the Constitution, and I'm merely inserting Article 2, Section 13, quoting that section, which claims that there is to be a 2/3 majority for passage in both houses of the Kansas legislature. And that pretty much sums up my amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll stand for questions.
Members, do you have questions of the carrier of the amendment? Representative Arnkamp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amendment I have talks more about I think it's my amendment that I had drafted. It might not be Representative Hauser's.
You handed out the wrong one, Mike.
Okay. So this will possibly be introduced later so we can keep the amendment with us.
Yeah, hang on to it. I think
Okay.
it's all right. It's a good cat.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Hauser? Well, I was looking at the other amendment when you were explaining and I was having trouble.
I couldn't follow.
Mike's trying to keep you on your toes.
Okay. Well,
Mike has me this time.
Would you care for me to redo that, Mr. Chair?
I would like for you to restate.
Okay, as I stated before, we've all sworn in an oath of office to uphold the state constitution as well as the Constitution of the United States. The people of the state of Kansas have made it known through the Constitution of the state of Kansas of the requirements for the request of an article of convention. So I thought it would be prudent and wise to include in the will of the people of the state of Kansas in a resolution that is calling for Congress to call a commission of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the United States Constitution. That is the basis of my amendment. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. That's the amendment. Stand for questions. Questions of the carrier of the amendment. Yes, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, you had testified during the hearing in opposition to this resolution for an application for a convention of states. So does this amendment mean that you would be supportive?
You can't ask that question.
I can't ask that question.
You can't ask.
I
the question.
apologize.
If you get your amendment on, will you then vote for the bill? Can't ask that question. It's not allowed.
Okay.
Okay. And Representative Miller's out of line.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. But I was just curious, since he had testified in opposition, kind of where his, what his intention was with this, because this is already in the state constitution. It's in our House rules that we adopted. So how does this improve the resolution? Thank you.
Thank you. Representative, you may respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel it's prudent that we include these words. This is the will of the people of the state of Kansas. And we're doing, this is serious business, folks. If you're putting in an if you're putting in an application to Congress to go in and change amendments to, or even totally change the Constitution of the United States, you know, that's serious business. And we need to respect how serious this is. And I want to know, it should be on record in this resolution, the will of the people of the state of Kansas requiring 2/3 majority vote in both houses. That's why it should be in there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Representative Henn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the bringing of the amendment. As I read it over, it looks to be redundant for what we already have promulgated before the citizens of Kansas in our Constitution, and a simple understanding of the Constitution of the United States for ratification of anything amendments therein. I would not be supportive of this amendment, and I encourage others to do the same.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Representative Heiberger. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just in case the body has forgot, I'd like to point out that the current Attorney General of Kansas has issued an opinion stating that we don't have to abide by the 2/3 rule for voting on this amendment. So I find that of some concern, and I'll support the amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Representative, you may, Representative. Oh, we have it's been explained. I need a second. Second, Representative Hoyt. Thank you. Representative, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to a previous comment from a fellow committee member, I find nothing redundant about putting what the will of the people of the state of Kansas have already spelled out in our own Constitution. I feel that their will should be followed, regardless of what an attorney general may have said. Had we do that, we're saying that the people of the state of Kansas have no authority, when in fact they give us all authority. They are the authority. They're the ones that give us our authority. We do not have authority over them. So with that, I would think that anybody that holds their oath of office and their responsibility to uphold the Kansas Constitution would vote in favor of this. So there, I move my motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard Representative Hauser move his motion to amend House Concurrent Resolution 5027. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Opinion of the chair? Opinion of the chair. The noes have it. Division has been called for. All in favor of the amendment, raise their right hand. Those, did you get everybody? Okay, those opposed? The motion fails.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to have my vote recorded.
Connie, if you would, and I'm going to go through with their hands up. Vote, Representative Arnkamp was an aye. Representative Hoyt was an aye. Representative Clayton was an aye. Representative Heiberger was an aye. You've got yours recorded, Representative Hauser. Nothing further. Thank you. We are back on the House Concurrent Resolution 5027. Further discussion.
Thank you.
Representative Arnkamp, do you wish to
Hey, Mr.
be
Chairman.
recognized?
Thank you. I have an amendment, and it's the amendment that was just handed out before Representative Hauser's.
Yeah, we have that one already, so
Yes,
you
sir.
may go forward and explain your amendment, please.
There's a lot of uncertainty about the Convention of States, a lot of questions. The amendment simply states that if the convention is not called, if the 2/3 of the states have not made a similar application by June 30th, 2027, so a little over 5 years, our application here in Kansas is automatically rescinded.
Thank you. You have explained your amendment. Is there a second to the amendment? Representative Miller is the second. Discussion.
Smith.
Who?
Smith.
Oh, Representative Smith. Okay. You're hearing my eyes, maybe. That's
I'm gonna get a little flag. I think that's what I'll do. So anyway, there's some discussion on whether or not that's needed, simply because the power to rescind an application for a convention is in every state's hands. They can rescind this at any time. There doesn't have to be a sunset. It simply has to be brought up for a vote to rescind it's an unnecessary addition to this, and adds another piece that would have to be vetted under the aggregation with other states. So I'm going to be voting against this amendment.
Thank you. Yep, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been voting for some of these amendments. I'm a strong supporter of this one, but I do want to say I'm a strong supporter of the underlying resolution. I'm very excited about what a convention of states might end up in the way of product. Such far-ranging issues as the right to bear arms as being revisited, as my friend from Cherokee has mentioned. A couple Supreme Court justices have suggested that's exactly the way to do that, would be through a convention of states. Roe v. Wade, for those concerned about Roe v. Wade being in jeopardy, convention of states would be a very good way to supplant that as a written part of our Constitution and not just an interpretive opinion of the Supreme Court. The subjects that are listed in the resolution before us, I don't have any particular problem with either. It's one of the reasons I support it. But as to the amendment, there's a lot of cloudiness as to when the ratification process ends. I was here, well, actually I wasn't here yet. It happened just before I got here that Kansas ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. And today there is an argument going on whether or not additional states can still be added to accomplish the 3/4 states requirement for ratification. This amendment that's being offered eliminates those kinds of questions as it relates to the Convention of States process. And I think for purposes of clarity, it's a good one. And I don't happen to believe that it is a amendment that jeopardizes what we're trying to do. 5 years politically is a long time, and the climate can change. So I think it's good that in today's climate, the environment that I view, I support the Convention of States, but 5 years from now, I'm not sure I still would. And I don't want to have to revisit it if we can put an amendment in here that settles that issue here and now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be in support of this amendment. I think it's a great amendment. How many of y'all know how many active applications from the state of Kansas are still on the books? Anybody care to guess? There's 5. They date back to 1909. Last one was in 1978. And they range from everything from direct election of senators to a balanced budget amendment. So I agree with the previous speaker. Political times change. There should be a sunset on these things. There may have been one in there that we wouldn't agree with today, but it's still an application. So I stand in support of this amendment. I urge you to vote the same.
Thank you. No further questions. Representative, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We see sunsets put on a lot of legislation. It's because it may seem like a good idea now. In a few years, things may happen, which may show that there's a little bit of concern. We may need to take another look at it. This just requires the legislature to take another look at it. If it passes, I close and move my amendment.
Here, you have heard Representative Arnkamp, close on his amendment. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chair? Noes have it. A division has been called for. All in favor of the amendment, raise your right hand.
1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Those opposed to the amendment, raise your right hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Thank you. The motion to amend has failed. We are back on the resolution. Yes. Anyone else would like to have their vote recorded? Seeing Representative Hoyt was an aye. Representative Clayton was an aye. Representative Heiberger was an aye. I think that's all. Thank you. We're back on the resolution. Further discussion? Seeing none. Representative, Representative, do you wish to close on your? No? Who made the motion to pass this? You made the motion. Do you have a comment?
Just a comment.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe Kansas is a regional agency of the federal government. And with that, that's why I'm supporting this resolution for a convention of states. It serves as a check to the federal government, and our founders put in Article 5 of the Constitution as an additional check. Now, I don't believe that Congress should be the only body to propose amendments to the Constitution. I believe states are entrusted with that tool, that responsibility. And so that is why I wholeheartedly support this. At the very least, an application for a convention of states does send a message to Congress, to the federal government, that there is concern about a $30 trillion publicly held debt and, an out of control centralized government. So we are a sovereign state, and I do support this resolution and would ask my colleagues to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. No further discussion. Representative Arnberger, you may move your resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the committee rises, or I guess I can't say that, when the committee rises and report. I move that we pass out House Concurrent Resolution 5027 favorably for passage.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Representative Epley has seconded it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Chair is unsure. All in favor, raise your right hand.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Those opposed,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
thank you. The resolution passes out. Anyone want their vote recorded? Okay, Representative Hoheisel, that was a yes, is a yes. Give me the yeses first. Yes, Representative Penn, Representative Epley, Representative Howell, Representative Mosier, Representative Smith.
Well, you have been watching the Kansas House Committee on Federal and State Affairs, and I am happy and excited to report to you that they have just voted by a vote of 14-8 to pass our Convention of States resolution on to the full Kansas House for debate and a vote. So again, this is Rita Peters. I'm the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And we're pleased to have just brought you coverage of the Kansas House Committee on Federal and State Affairs. They just voted 14-8 to pass our Convention of States resolution out to the full Kansas House for a vote. And of course, our resolution applies for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and set term limits for federal officials and members of Congress. So my favorite moment, I think, of watching that hearing was when the Kansas representative said, I do not believe that Kansas is an agency of the federal government. He was, of course, alluding to the fact that Washington is continuously passing all of these unfunded federal mandates down to the states and expecting them to figure out how to pay to implement the policies that the federal government favors. So this committee just took their stand and said, we are going to stand up for the distribution of powers originally intended and written into the Constitution, limiting Washington, D.C. to those powers specifically enumerated in the Constitution and reserving the remainder, the bulk, the vast majority of governing power to the states and to the people. I'm also excited to let you know that this vote today in the Kansas House Committee on Federal and State Affairs was a bipartisan vote. There were 2 Democrats included in those 14 yes votes. Also want to let you know that although you didn't see the chairman vote, that is just a tradition in the Kansas House, but the chair of that committee is a supporter of Convention of States. So thank you for watching today. This was exciting to end this week with yet another victory this year for Convention of States. Thanks for your support. If you want to get involved and help rein in the federal government for good, go to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, but then click on that Take Action tab to get started. Become a volunteer on your state's team and find out how you can get involved and actually have impact and be included in this fight for liberty.